listening. You are, of course, listening to Africa Speaks with Sister Ekua of PARCO, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, presenting to you this week's edition of Africa Speaks with Sister Ekua on Voice of Afrika Radio, 94 FM, www.voiceofafrikaradio.com. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope that you are well this evening and you are prepared for our conversation. As usual, we always bring in very stimulating topics to discuss because this is your Voice of Afrika Radio. Well, before we come on to our main topic, you know we always like to have a little focus on Nuum. And before I come to that Nuum focus, I probably should let you know what we're discussing this evening. Our topic is, what are the contributions of the Rasta movement to the ongoing cause of African liberation? Yes, well, we are in that month, African Liberation Awareness Month, and this show is part of our special programming where we've been exploring the contributions of Rastafari, both physical and spiritual, in Africa and the African diaspora. And as you know, we will be having our very own African Liberation Day event, which we will be hearing more about. I hope many of you will be coming to our event where we'll be discussing what is the meaning of African liberation. And so, as a radio station, we have taken the step to try and engage you, our listeners, in reflecting on what this liberation means. Jamaican Professor of African American Studies and Political Science, Horace Campbell, identifies Rastafari as one of the most significant movers and shapers of Pan-African ideas, even more so than Pan-Africanism as an intellectual movement. In the words of one African-Caribbean Pan-Africanist based in Guyana, Usi Kwayana, the power of art that Bob Marley's music represented had done more to popularize the real issues of African liberation than several decades of back-breaking work by Pan-Africanists and international revolutionaries. Notably, one of the most foundational contributions of Rastafari to the cause of African liberation has been the reassertion of the divinity of Africanness through the deification of an African monarch, His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie, the embrace of the Aito, or natural living and liberty, and the critiques of Babylon, or Western civilization. According to Jamaican theologian Noel Leo Erskine, in From Garvey to Mali, Rastafari Theology, the whole Rastafarian theology boils down to this: God is an African. So that the central question the Rastas pose for us is, where do we stand in relation to Africa? A significant feature of Rastafari, therefore, has been to challenge the white God complex that has bedeviled so many peoples of African origin since the onset of Euro-American colonialism and the advent of Christianity in Africa. In addition, Rastafarians made significant ideological contributions to the African liberation struggle by building on Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement. The roots of Rastafari are traced back to the Ethiopianist movement and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, established in 1914 in Jamaica by Marcus Mosiah Garvey. While Zionists preached the return of Jews to Palestine, Ethiopianists maintained that Africans in the diaspora should return to Africa, and particularly to the historical heart of Africa, Ethiopia. In the Caribbean, Rastafarians challenged neo-colonialism and capitalism in diverse ways. Rastafarians in Jamaica were active in trade union and labour struggles to bring about increased rights and wages for African workers. Rastafarians were also involved and actively engaged in the Grenadian Revolution, as well as being part of the Black Power movement in Trinidad during the 1970s. On the continent, African liberation movements such as those in Zimbabwe used reggae music to raise the consciousness of the African masses, mobilize people towards emancipatory self-expression and action by incorporating the themes of African liberation into its lyrics. So that is our introduction, and of course we always have some guests to stimulate our thoughts on this topic. So our guests today will be Tony Tafari Thomas and also Yasas Tafari. Now Tony Tafari Thomas is a former founder and director of Hip Hop Generation UK and was identified by the Independent on Sunday as one of 10 young, gifted and black, quote unquote, in the field of politics. Thomas is the current chair of the Rastafari Council of Britain. Greetings to you.
Yes, greetings and stuff. Thanks for having me on the show again.
That's okay. Well, we've got a lot to cover. Very big show, important conversation. And we're going to begin, or attempt to begin, at one of the beginnings. Who is Rastafari?
Well, I'm wondering how you asked me that, because Rastafari is, if you ask me about the man, it was a man called Tafari who came to prominence in Ethiopia in the 1920s, and at the time of his coronation, which was in 1930, which basically instigated or started the rebirth of the Rasta movement. His name was Tafari. Rasta as a movement, I would describe it as a new African lifestyle and cultural identity movement, which is rooted in the lived experience of the people of African descent in the Western world. And it's a political, intellectual, religious, humanistic and ecological movement that encompasses many facets of life and human experience. Rasta is a philosophy and what we refer to as a liberty. So this is a term that refers to a lived spirituality, and it is a philosophy that is in an ever state of becoming.
Okay, now you say a liberty. Just break that down for our listeners, because some people will be familiar with what it means, but others will not. So, tell us, what is a liberty?
Well, I would describe a liberty as a spirituality in action. So a liberty is not so much about going to a particular institution or going to a church or a temple to pray or to meditate. It's about actually putting your spirituality and your values into action.
Okay. And what are the roots of Rasta?
Well, Rasta, as we know it in its modern interpretation, arose in the 1930s in response to the coronation of Tafari, who was crowned as Haile Selassie. But Rasta has some more deeper roots than that. The roots of Rasta can be found in the ancient civilizations of the Nile Valley in Africa. These civilizations included Nubia and the Great Egypt, or Kemet as we refer to it as. The civilization that built the pyramids developed writing, religious thought, philosophy, and the very concept of civilization itself. So in Kemet, the first religious and ethical texts were written that would go on to influence religious thought all over the world. So in 2050 BC, we get the first written definition of the sage in Africa in what is referred to as the Antef inscription. The sage was referred to as the Siba, and this is a word rooted in it is the root word of the Greek term sophist, which makes up the term philosopher. So the sage is referred to as he is the one whose heart is informed about the things which would be otherwise ignored, the one who is clear-sighted when he is deep into a problem, who penetrates ancient writings, who is sensible enough to unravel complications, who is really wise. The sage was often depicted seated, reading or writing a text with long locks of hair. Tutankhamun, probably the most well-known African king, was discovered with locks on his head, and the locks were seen as a commitment to a life of sagacity and of royalty. And there were also those in the tradition of African sage that wore low hair, such as Imhotep, but locks were a definite symbol of wisdom. And these wise men and sages were the cultural architects of Kemet. In the book of Coming Forth by Day, there is an ode to a lord who is referred to as Lord Rasta. Rasta was a term used to describe the way to the other world. So we have, so to speak, reinvented the term as a rebirth of this ancient tradition and this ancient culture.
Which goes back to Nile Valley civilizations and Kemet and so forth. So how does the sort of whole connection, or is there one, I should ask first, with the whole Israelite? Because, you know, we talk about, I also hear very commonly in terms of Rasta, this notion of being of the tribes of Israel. So how do you make that link also with Israelite heritage?
Well, within the Rasta faith, there are various different interpretations, and some organizations and some individuals have tried to make a connection between themselves and the tribe of Israel. My personal conception of Rasta is not rooted in those ideas. Basically, when I think about the Bible, I think about a story of a particular people that stem from a particular part of the world, what they call the Levant region. So it's the area around Palestine and the Middle East. And this is not the same lineage as we as African people. So in the Bible, it talks about Ham, Shem, and Japhet. So the Bible is actually a story of Shem. It is not a story of Ham. And we, as African people, would be referred to as the Hamitic people. So at the time when Israel were experiencing, according to the Bible, this is when they were experiencing slavery, the Hamitic people were basically lording over them, and they had a different set of ideas which the people of Israel disagreed with.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do, I'm trying to do, is to bring Rasta back into a more African context. And there is a strain of thought within Rasta that has been articulating this for a long time, but it just hasn't become as prominent as the types of ideas connected with Christianity or with Judaism. And in a sense, some Rastas may have been quite fearful to really step beyond the boundary of the Western monotheistic faiths, but I, as a Rasta, am not afraid to do that.
All right, I think we're probably going to explore that point a bit more, but I think we need to take a little break. So hold that thought. Warm greetings. We are discussing what are the contributions of the Rasta movement to the ongoing cause of African liberation. And remember, we're talking about both spiritual and physical liberation. And so it's necessary to kind of get a bit of a foundation in terms of, you know, Rastafari and what it means, what it's all about, so that we can really engage in the wider topic, linking it to our ongoing liberation as African people. And we are speaking with Tony Tafari Thomas, who is the chair of the Rastafari Council of Britain. Coming back to you, Tony. Now, it's interesting what you were saying before the break. You were making it very clear that there are different, if you like, what we call houses of Rasta, and there are some who link Rasta to an Israelite heritage, but you particularly want to return it to what you're saying is a more African idea, going back to Kemet and the Nile Valley. I mean, that's probably going to be quite a challenge, and I think it will help, you know, contextualize our conversation, really trying to explore what is Rasta, because if there are different houses, then I think it's important for our listeners to have a better understanding of what some of these distinctions are. So we'll probably might revisit that, and I'm sure some of our listeners would like to join in the conversation, but not yet. We want to hear a bit more from Tony first. So, okay, this question of African Zionism then, which again, many people would associate with some, you know, strands, if you like, or houses of Rasta, in particular those who identify with an Israelite heritage. Do you recognize Rasta as being a kind of African Zionism?
I would definitely say that. I think African Zionism would be a central part of the Rasta philosophy.
And what is your understanding then of African Zionism, and how it's different or how it relates to Jewish Zionism, if at all?
I would describe African Zionism as the folk philosophy of African descendants of slaves in the Western world. It's been a constant theme throughout our philosophies and throughout our music. We were taken away from Africa and we lost contact with Africa. We could not point to a place or a particular tribe that we came from or a language that we spoke, but we knew from oral stories that we had been taken from Africa and Africa was our home. So what we done is we developed an idealistic image of what Africa was or what Africa could be. It became, after decolonization, a vision for Africa that seemed more and more out of date, out of touch with the actual African reality, but it was a dream that could not die. And Rasta have been the ones who have kept the flame of hope for Africa burning. So African Zionism is fundamentally the return of the African diaspora to its land of milk and honey in Africa. African Zionism is a pan-African philosophy, and it is rooted in our ideas of a new Pan-Africa, a new African civilization to astonish the world. And, the similarity between the Jewish Zionism and African Zionism is that they have in common the fact that they both stem from a historical people who do not have a homeland, people that are scattered all over the world. So I think the term diaspora first developed in discussions about the Jewish people. So we are kind of very similar to them in the sense that we are historical people who are seeking for a land, who are scattered across the world, and who have been persecuted in many different parts of the world.
Okay, this is interesting because there are some who would say, yes, of course, we know about the Jewish people being persecuted, but also there is this connection, which is not necessarily just Rastas who would embrace this connection with, you know, this notion of being, you know, dispersed, if you like, from their homeland. But there are many indigenous African groupings that we would recognize today on the continent who would also, you know, trace their historical origins, you know, back to a place that, you know, today we would call Israel, or certainly that whole region. So this is quite interesting, and I'm just wondering if at any point on your travels, in terms of your philosophy and how you relate to Rasta, there has been that crossing over, yeah, between indigenous African groups, you know, for instance, the Lemba of Southern Africa, some of the Ashanti peoples. You know, there are many similar traditions that Jewish people keep today that many of these, you know, ethnicities and nationalities, if you like, who have been living on the continent for centuries and centuries and centuries also keep. So I'm wondering if at any point there could have been this crossover in your estimation.
Within my estimation, I wouldn't think so. I think that what we as an African people have tried to do, we've tried to sew ourselves into another people's story and at the expense of our own. So Rasta is really about us trying to get focused and to start to tell the story of those people of African descent that exist in the Western world. What have been the trials and tribulations that they have been through? I mean, the Bible may talk about Moses, but we don't necessarily need a Moses because we have a Toussaint Louverture, or we have a Marcus Garvey, and we don't necessarily need a Jesus because we have a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X. So I think that there's definitely a need for us to stop trying to sew ourselves into other people's story and understand the origins and our root within Africa.
All right, okay. So what would you say then are the unifying principles of Rasta?
The unifying principles of Rasta? Well, the teachings of Rasta work to unify in particular those of African descent in the Western world and those on the continent of Africa. Rasta is a pan-African philosophy that calls upon African people to create a new identity, a new body politic beyond ethnicity and nationality, an identity that emphasizes the interconnectedness of African people and the collective self-interest in political, economic and cultural union. So we're arguing that this would be the best way forward for African people to rise in the world and become a superpower, to become a respected people. So Rasta argues that we are not Ghanaian, Ethiopian, Caribbean or black, but that we are an African. Rasta teaches a philosophy that emphasizes the cultural unity of Africa, which is, I suppose, rooted in the writings of Sheikh Anta Diop. We see Africa as an idea as much as a place. So Rasta are also committed to the ideals of collective security, human rights and global citizenship as espoused by Tafari Makonnen through his long and illustrious career. So Rasta at all levels basically work to bring about unity between all people. Tafari Makonnen once said that the mystics of the ages have taught us that we are all spiritual kinsmen. So Rasta in its very essence is a unifying philosophy which tries to unify African people, it tries to unify political states across the world, and it tries to unify various religious or spiritual groups in the spirit of Tafari Makonnen, who strive throughout his life to do these things.
Okay, that's I'm hearing that. I guess I'm still thinking of an earlier question, but I'll come back to it. So you've spoken about these principles. How then, or where would we find the teachings of Rasta in terms of the ethics? How would people, if they wanted to learn, is there a book, is there a manual, is there a code that people could go to?
Well, there's a number of books that people could go to. At this precise moment, as I think I mentioned the last time when we was on the show, Rasta has not been around as long as some of these other faiths, so we haven't had the same amount of time to develop our ideas and more succinctly to document our ideas. But the ethics of Rasta, as I stated earlier, is rooted in the ethics of the wise sages of the Nile Valley. So we read texts such as the teachings of Ptah Hotep. The teachings of Ptah Hotep is allegedly the oldest book in the world, the oldest ethical text in the world. When we document our faith, these will be the foundation texts of our declaration. And we practice keeping the principles of the 42 confessions of the ancient Kemetic tradition. And there's a whole load of various texts that have been written around that period of time, such as the Eloquent Peasant. But another important book for us would be the Selected Speeches of Haile Selassie, which is a book that's been basically put together with all of the most profound and most prominent speeches of Tafari Makonnen throughout his lifetime. So the Egyptian texts underpin the central ethics practiced by Tafari Makonnen, our God and our teacher. So in the words of Tafari, we find a modern rebirth of the tradition of the ancients in the Nile Valley. In Tafari, we find a personification of those ancient ethical teaching. So we walk in the ethical path of the conquering lion, so Tafari, who inspires all. So Tafari teaches us to defend human rights, strive for collective security, to strive for global citizenship, and to strive towards democracy and the practice of international law and the practice of ecological sustainability. So I suppose we could have one fundamental ethical teaching of the Rasta faith. It would be that the truth is that all life and all beings are interconnected. So we'd probably ask a question like, would you hurt yourself?
Good question. Would you hurt yourself? Unfortunately, too many of us are hurting ourselves, and many others like us.
This is Voice of Afrika Radio.
The ideas about Jehovah or Allah, to bring them down to earth, down to a more humanistic level, and to try to move away from God in the sky, Dapi God, and all these types of conceptions. So when we talk about God, we consider the term God to be a title, and it is a title that are given to those people, those human beings who through their life and through their character and through their works, we believe that they are worthy of praise. So this is an ancient African tradition where, for example, in Kemet, the pharaoh was considered to be, was given a term called Neter Nejer, which is the good God. And individuals that were able to become successful in their life, who were being able to become wise sages and enlightened, these people were also deified. So what you find with our philosophy is that our philosophy is a very down-to-earth philosophy that doesn't actually seek for a God to come down from the sky, or a God to solve our problems. And I think this is the very radical element of Rasta, that Rasta says that human beings have the ability to improve themselves, to take control of life and existence on the earth, to create a lifestyle where we don't need to create false creator gods in order to make us feel better about ourselves and about life. Rasta really tries to confront reality.
Okay, thanks for that. And how then would you say this is, been part of the process of African liberation? How would you connect that to today, and in particular our main topic?
I think one of the key things within the whole concept of African liberation was about us collecting all of the data and information about the great civilizations that had been run by people of African descent. When we look at Europe, for example, we find that they had a period, what they call the Renaissance. And during the Renaissance period, what they done is they looked around for any other people that looked like them, and they created a concept of what they called the Western civilization. So they included Greek texts, and they included Roman texts and Greek and Roman ideas into the modern development, the modern intellectual development of this place called Europe. So we as Rasta, we are also instigating, and we have instigated this same type of process, which has led to many people starting to find out more about the ancient traditions of Africa, to find out more about their roots, and start to develop a new intellectual idea of what it is to be an African. Perhaps the most important contribution that Rasta has made to African liberation is the attempt to move us away from religious faiths which have been forced upon us by people from different parts of the world, or people from different cultural experiences. And Rasta is seeking to make African people enlightened. And this is what we see with Tafari Makonnen. We see a man who was enlightened, and he's so enlightened that is why he's able to be given the title of God. So in many ways, we are trying to move people away from the religious mumbo-jumbo that has characterized, no disrespect, maybe Christianity or Judaism. Ideas about a jealous God, a God coming down to speak with human beings. We are kind of moving beyond that level and becoming more and more realistic. I remember Bob Marley said in one of his songs, regarding the palace so majestic, regarding the palace so realistic. And he says, if you know what life is worth, you would seek for yours on earth. So in that sense, Rasta is a non-transcendental philosophy, and we think that this is its greatest contribution to African liberation, is to get our heads from out of the clouds.
Thank you.
United we stand, divided we fall. Voice of Afrika Radio, 94 FM.
Africa Unite. Of course, we're talking about African liberation. We're discussing what are the contributions of the Rasta movement to the ongoing cause of African liberation. And we've been speaking with Tony Tafari Thomas. We were trying to connect with our brother Yasser Safari. So Yasser, if you're listening, we have been trying to connect with you, and hopefully we will get to do so. But we also have Brother Blessed Barak in the studio with us, and he's going to come in on the conversation to share some more information. And of course, we are going to be opening the phone lines probably in about 5 minutes' time. The questions we're asking is, what is the significance of Rastafari to Africa and African people today? Is Rastafari still elevating the consciousness of the African masses? Is Rastafari an African diaspora alternative to Islam and Catholicism? What do we have to do to secure God's or the Creator's support in our continued liberation, however we understand God? And finally, what role can the National African People's Parliament play in institutionalising respect for African spiritual systems? Well, you can give us a text on 07904 899 195, but we're not going to be opening the phone lines for about another 5 minutes. I have a text here from Brother Kwame, and he says, I want to big up our Rastafarian families in this earth. Their strength and abilities are so exceptional because Africans are the original beings of our kingdoms from Dahomey to the Congo. Ja Rastafari, my Rasta brothers and sisters. Thank you so much, Brother Kwame, NE15. I'm going to come to you next, Blessed Barak, and it'd be good if you can just share with us your thoughts on how Rasta has contributed to the ongoing cause of African liberation. Of course, building on what Brother Tony has been saying around the spiritual reorientation and foundations that Rasta has, brought about.
Well, tonight still and greetings to all of your listeners, them sister, Ekua. You don't know, Blessed Barak in the house. Big up Tony Tafari, the reason them well I. Well, you know, Rastafari is for sure a liberation movement. I mean, one of the key things I can show the island as well, is if you look at the liberty of Rastafari, you know what I mean? You know, what's keeping us down is global capitalism, slowing the down pressure. And you see the way of life of a Rastafari, the discipline, more or less, now eat into the fast food industry. Him now wear the tight up things them where them are wear, and the word of fashion where everyone are run for. So, Steve Biko use not buying from them as a great tool for make, political powers listen. Because I mean, if you want to have a voice within the movement, I mean, you hit them where it hurts, the pocket. It's not about reeling up we mouth and talking a whole heap of this and that. Is about straight reality. And if you not buy from them, you know, you suck off them life. You know, them can't get for oppress you, you know. And I mean, the Rastaman daily life is to wake up in the morning and more or less dodge these traps of anything we can draw you into this web of consumerism and wastage. And it's helping to oppress I and I brothers and sisters them all over the world. So if I and I say, for example, I support certain industries and certain, you know, I'm also killing I and I brothers them in Africa. So, you know, there has to be the consciousness, the awareness of within I and I mind as a Rastafari go far and wide, just beyond I and I one physical being. You know, the Rastafari, you know, you know, look towards, you know, we burn certain things, you know, we don't deal with certain leathers and, you know, certain things. So you can see very clearly that there's many aspects, just even in the way how the Rastafari live, you know, is already a key to the liberation of I and I people. And I mean, you mentioned originally as well, you know, about you know, African Zion-I, of course, is Rasta philosophy, you know, so repatriation with skills, intelligence, you know, cause Rastafari is moving to a stage of higher intelligence now, you know, where, you know, we develop our understanding of many things, science, art, skills, trade. So repatriation, you know, and I move towards reparation. We're bringing a lot of skills and knowledge, you know, and understanding towards Africa, you know, in order to development. You know, we don't want some little, you know, you know, as well as, you know, food. I mean, you can't start a revolution without food. And one of the Rastafari first trade, the first thing we do is come to plant food. So I and I come to plant food, and we come with the intelligence to build enough steel structure and, you know, whatever we need towards, you know, and the Rastafari is boom in intuition and common sense. So it's also, you have to be able to understand the situation you're in any different parts of Africa. You know, we can intuit and understand what I and I should be doing right now in this time. You know, the Hebrew and Jewish connection into Rastafari, if you look at, you know, words, if you look at that original word for Hebrew, you know what I mean, if you read it from left to right and take if you understand Hebrew, you'd see it say Yoruba, it's the Dogon people. You know, so I and I connected in any way you want to take it to, more or less everywhere in Africa. Give thanks to life.
Okay, I mean, that's very useful to hear about those kind of global connections. Now, would you say, I think Brother Tony Tafari has already said it, but I'm going to ask you about it. This is a diaspora, if you like, movement. Do you feel that, and we know that there are many Rastas who are on the continent of Africa who, you know, were born on the continent, but do you see Rasta as being able to liberate, you know, the majority of the African masses on the continent? Is this a liberty that can, if I'm thinking about rural folk, you know, in rural areas, is this something that you feel that they can embrace, or is it particularly young men or young women who have had a westernized upbringing that would be more likely to embrace Rastafari?
Well, you know, Rastafari did develop in the West, you know, as in, but with its, which, you know, it's an inbound concept, but it bears so many similarities towards ancient Kemet, Kush, the whole Nile Valley civilization, and it bears so many similarities towards, you know, traditional African. Like, for example, you know, Rastafari will find himself by the water, by the river. That's like a mommy water thing already, you know. Rastafari would, you know, have the drumming, you know, every single tradition in Africa, you know, beat the drum. So, you know, I mean, if we focus on our similarities, you know, with each other, then also this will help to bridge all for the unity. I know many people of the older ages, you know, might be in Africa that say, oh, you know, they have a little few things about Rasta, and, you know, you know, yeah, you know, Rasta didn't grow up, so enough of Rasta didn't grow up on the continent, and they might have certain, you know, thoughts which the ancients within Africa might feel, say, you know, might feel a bit, have something to say about it. Well, you know, Rasta is very good at reasoning, so we're ready for reason with any ones and ones who have specific things where they might think that, you know, might be hard to gel and link with Rastafari on the continent. But on a whole, generally, we have a lot more similarities and ways of uniting, you know, with the old, with the young. You know what I mean? Especially the young love we, because, you know, we still are born Babylon, and we still, you know, represent Africa. We still look out for the youths, and the youth them trust we a lot, and we have a lot of respect out there from the youths. And also this put a lot of responsibility on us also to make sure that we present the thing in a way where the youths can understand it and also be approachable to the youth as normal. So we have to really keep the young, you know, keep connecting with them.
Thank you so much.